Hey everyone. Before we get started today, I want to thank you for listening to Open Container and ask that you please subscribe to the show by clicking follow on the podcast app you're using right now. Following the podcast is the best way to ensure that we will continue to crack open the container every single week. Thank you, and let's start the show. Welcome to Open Container. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. I'm a journalist, writer, and overall lover of the outdoors. I've fought wildfires, reported on national politics, published magazines. I've even woken to the dawn chorus of songbirds in the deep reaches of the Great Basin's sea of sagebrush. On this podcast, we're going to have an open conversation about culture, conservation, policy, business, issues that matter the most to the outdoor community. Let's get some. Just before the summer solstice, I found myself in a state of deep depression. At the time, Utah Senator Mike Lee's proposal to sell off a mandated 3.3 million acres out of a possible 250 million acres of public land felt unstoppable. I felt powerless, facing the idea that something so many of us hold sacred could be taken away. This modest proposal was nothing short of a coup. It would completely restructure the way the United States manages public land. Instead of being spaces open to all, these lands would be parceled off and sold to private interests. Senator Lee and his small group of supporters argued that this land was unused and could be better put towards housing. But it didn't take much investigation to uncover the disingenuousness of their pitch. The land wasn't going to be sold for affordable housing. It was to be sold to wealthy donors, developers looking to build gated communities, and industries that believe they have a divine right to the land over everyone else. Some excellent reporting in the Colorado Sun exposed exactly what Senator Lee and his allies envisioned: freedom cities, run by tech bros and free from federal laws and regulations. They would use nuclear reactors to power AI. It sounds absurd, and it is. One proposed city for 350,000 people was to be located north of Fruita and Grand Junction. As the Sun pointed out, the idea wasn't even feasible when you considered water access, infrastructure, or county zoning regulations. But this was what we were facing: people who saw public lands not as shared spaces, but as parcels to sell off for profit or pipe dream schemes. Back to my own despair. The world has been hard on many of us lately. Personally, I've been battling cancer, trying to navigate the shifting financial terrain of the outdoor media world, and working to define myself as a leader, as a good human, as someone who cares deeply about the legacy our generation will leave on this planet. Some of this is the common angst of modern life, but what gives me hope is always the planet itself: wild places, biodiversity, spaces of life and renewal. The loss of public lands would be the loss of a unique kind of freedom, a democratic freedom that allows any of us to experience nature on our own terms, regardless of politics, race, or gender. And for a moment, it felt like that freedom might vanish. Feeling powerless, I watched the sun set on the solstice and reminded myself, we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Victory or change can come suddenly. And it did. I was exhilarated to witness the overwhelming response from the outdoor community. The opposition spread like wildfire. Hunters, hikers, wilderness advocates, ATV enthusiasts, all people who use public lands, rose in outrage. The slogan, "Not One Acre," caught fire. Caroline Gleick, who ran for Senate in Utah last year, issued bold calls for activism. She urged people to contact their senators and representatives to protest this sell-off. Senator Martin Heinrich of New Mexico delivered impassioned pleas. Surprisingly, some of the strongest reactions came from the hunting and angling communities, people who understand wildlife and the land it depends on. These were not people easily fooled by empty rhetoric. They appreciate ecosystems that function freely, without no trespassing signs popping up on every corner. We posted, we called, we protested, and we were heard. Senator Lee eventually scaled back his proposal, reducing it to several million acres of Bureau of Land Management land instead of the full 250 million. But the pressure continued. Advocates like Rochelle Schrute and Meat Eater continued the call. Not 1 acre. Caroline Gleick delivered 11,000 letters opposing the sell-off to Senator John Curtis of Utah, the same man who defeated her last fall. Traditional conservation groups like the Wilderness Society and outdoor advocacy groups like the Access Fund kept up the pressure. And of course, hundreds of thousands of Americans who love public lands made their voices heard through letters, social media, and phone calls. At last, this past weekend, Senator Lee removed the provision from the bill entirely. Still, he didn't seem to understand why. He claimed outside money had come in to defeat him. An ironic accusation when it was actually ski bums, hunters, and other dirtbags who love this land more than profit who rallied against him. He also claimed the bill's language was flawed and could have allowed lands to be sold to China, a desperate attempt to save face. But the battle is far from over. The forces pushing for privatization, tech moguls wanting freedom cities, industries hungry to log and mine, will continue to spread propaganda and work to transfer public land into private hands. Already, the Trump administration plans to eliminate the roadless rule, threatening to open 58 million acres of pristine wilderness to road building. The very agencies meant to protect these lands, the Forest Service, National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, are being systematically defunded. The strategy is clear. Starve them until they can't function, then claim privatization is the only option. This would be a grave mistake. If Senator Lee accomplished one thing, it was uniting both sides of the political aisle against him. That gave me real joy. This is what we need in America. People coming together, regardless of party, to rally around what matters, to stand for what heals us, empowers us, and defines the best of who we are. And that's exactly what terrifies those who would rather see us divided while they count their profits. There are times and places where public land can be responsibly traded or sold to benefit local communities, especially in the West. If this conversation were approached with integrity and the goal of finding real solutions for the challenges rural communities face, we could find a way forward. We could preserve wilderness, protect biodiversity, and support human communities. Unfortunately, too many of our politicians prefer slogans over solutions. They'd rather point fingers than work together. And they underestimate those of us who love wild places, people from all walks of life, from every corner of the country. We are not going anywhere. So let's unite. Let's compromise where we must. Wilderness lovers and off-roaders, conservationists and small-town residents, people who can see utility in the land and people who just want it left alone. We can find a way forward, together. My guest today was instrumental in this fight to stop the public land sell-off. She has also been key to many wins and much of the advocacy around public lands and outdoor recreation in Washington, D.C. Jessica Turner is the first president of the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, America's leading coalition of outdoor recreation associations and organizations. Jessica began her career at the Department of the Interior, where she managed external relations for the Secretary. Jessica is also the co-founder and past chair of the Coalition for Outdoor Access and has been recognized for her leadership in D.C. and the outdoor industry with Outdoors 30 Under 30 and The Hill's top lobbyist. So let's open the container with Jess Turner. I'm really excited to have our guest with us today, Jess Turner, because we just went through one hell of a week here fighting for public lands, and Jess has been on the forefront of that battle, which brings me to my first question for you, Jess, which is just, have you slept recently?
No, I wish you could see. Honestly, mostly because I have a kid who screams about comets in the middle of the night, a 2-year-old who's terrified of comets, which I understand. But no, it's been busy, couple weeks, months, years, I think. this weekend was kind of crazy to like be going to bed and getting senators from both sides texting me about info and votes and whip. And so Saturday night wasn't ideal at the beginning to be staying up late on this, but obviously the outcome was awesome. Slept very well after that. And, this is just a small part of what ORR does, right? So we've got all the other things in the hopper. So I think the team has just been on overdrive. So it's been a lot, but well worth it.
Yeah, we certainly had a comet hit the outdoor industry, right? Isn't that what I believe that it was Mark Twain or someone described John Brown as the comet that started the Civil War?
Oh, funny. I didn't even know my comment relevancy. My kid's ahead of its time. He knows what's going on.
That's right. So anyway, for anyone who doesn't know, obviously over the past several weeks, the whole outdoor community has really rallied and gotten together to take a provision out of the reconciliation bill, the big beautiful bill, as some people call it. And Jess, at ORR, you've really been working hard on talking to legislators all across the aisle. And my biggest question for you then is, do you think we've finally seen some proof that outdoor recreation and public lands are not partisan issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I see proof, daily, but I think this was really like a much more public setting of things that I've seen over the course of, the past couple of years. Joe Rogan has done a bunch of stories on it, quoted myself and Martin Heinrich in one of them, which was kind of wild, I think it was an outside piece. So, and then Don Jr., I don't know if you saw his statement yesterday, but he was like, we won, like public lands are safe. Like, yeah, you got to check it out. It was a crazy thing to see. But he, and then he acknowledged Senator Lee, and being a partner and a friend. And like, it wasn't, but it was definitely like, we won, we saved public lands. So that's Don Jr. So, and then of course, I met with the Wilderness Society event last week with all of that side, Wilderness Society and Sierra Club. And of course they were working. So I don't think it gets farther, right? And it really was like the recreation side of public lands. I mean, of course, people care about public lands, I think, inherently, but the value to the people who spoke out, whether they were, just concerned constituents or members of Congress, I think like the recreation aspect really made it to the top and to the forefront of the conversation, which was really great to see. And I was getting like memes sent from my friends who won't even go on hikes with me, right? Like they're like my DC friends that are totally outside of the space. And they're like sending me these like hilarious memes that people are putting out about, getting our public land stolen. And that's when I know we've broken through. And I'm like, okay, like the general public is like understanding this issue, hearing about it, seeing it. It was really, really amazing.
Yeah, I knew the balance had tipped when I saw Ted Nugent was posting,
Yes.
Famously conservative wacko was posting for public lands. So that seemed like a win in general. So all this good energy, all this good feeling. And as you said, this is not, maybe people might not be aware that, both sides of the political aisle can work together, that they've done it before in recreation. How do you think we can take this good feeling and move forward with it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just excited that I think people are seeing what I've seen through ORR, which is that we've come together, definitely all sides of the aisle, definitely all sides of outdoor recreation, and had some amazing wins over the past 5 or 6 years. Just like phenomenal things have come from that. And so where we sit sort of on the business side, maybe that's a little bit easier because there's like a business interest to help each other and lift all ships and understand that our consumers sort of the same. I think now this is like more of the general public having an awakening that, wow, like whatever I feel about Don Jr. or Joe Rogan or the Wilderness Society or Sierra Club, like we were in this together and actually did this together. What if we did some other things together? What if we talked more? What if we realized that we have some things in common? So that's pretty exciting because I think at the higher levels of things, or like in the business side of conversations, even in the halls of Congress, and I know people won't believe me on this, but I stand by it, things are not as polarized, right? Like it's theater, it's theatrics, it's where constituents are leading members, but I think a lot of times people want to come to agreement, and they want to have consensus, and they want to be friends with their peers on the other side. And it's the general public, sort of that doesn't feel that way or doesn't see that. So we haven't worked with user community groups because of the trailhead conflicts, because a user community, like a mountain biker, might be so threatened by a horseback rider, or vice versa, or a motorcyclist might be,
Right.
A climber might be so threatened by someone on an ATV, like so that's just like not where you see that compromise usually, but you do see it when you like have Yamaha and, VF, talking in a board meeting, or the ski industry and the snowmobile industry sitting next to each other. Like, of course they care about snow and they care about
Right.
winter, and they care about, people getting outside. So I would love to see like the groups at the local level, because that's where I think we need the work, coming together and saying, okay, you're a hunting angling group, or you are maybe even affiliated with like the NRA. Like there were some really conservative hunting angling groups, and we are, human powered mountain bike group, or we are whoever. We can come together around defending public lands. Maybe we should do more locally. What does that look like here? What is, how do we build that? How do we build those politicians locally? So there's a lot to do, and I'm excited that I think people are seeing what I've seen, which is we agree on a lot of stuff.
Do you think there's some good examples of places where those, different user groups have come together? I mean, I immediately think of somewhere like I immediately think of all the good work Arkansas, a lot of towns like
Oh yeah,
Bentonville and Arkansas have done to prove that this
Arkansas
works.
is Yeah, Arkansas is amazing. I think there's examples, everywhere. And I think these state recreation offices and what you just mentioned about Arkansas are a great place, right, for bringing those conversations together. I think even Utah does a good job of it. There's amazing backcountry human-powered experiences, and there's amazing motorized experience, and amazing hunting and fishing. And oddly enough, that's the state that wants to sell off a lot of these places, which is
Right.
but that's the other piece of this that was really interesting, was we weren't talking about wilderness. We weren't talking about monuments. We weren't talking about national parks. And I don't know that the American public even knew that, and that's okay. We were talking at the end of this, Forest Service got stripped. We were talking about Bureau of Land Management lands, which is like, you got to really be an outdoors person to even understand distinction there. And people are coming out of the woodwork defending these lands. And I'm like, where have you been, guys? Like the budget's getting cut. Like BLM lands are always the least, I feel like, respected or talked about. And it's so fun because I think BLM lands are like, it's where I started my career, is with the Bureau of Land Management. So I have like a little soft spot there, but that is the West. I mean, that is
Yes.
multi-use, and that is recreation. What I kept telling Senator Lee's staff, and what I told the House side that was doing this, was their unallocated BLM lands, the lands that we're talking about in most of these sell-off proposals. That's where multi-use recreation takes place, because a lot of recreation can't take place in a park or a wilderness or a monument. So like
Right.
that is literally where people hunt, fish, mountain bike, motorcycle, ATV, camp, boondock, RV, boat, like that's the land. So to see people come out for it, like that's awesome. Let's do more of that. And I'm also on the America's Foundation for Public Lands Board, which is the new congressionally chartered foundation for BLM, just like the Park Foundation or the Forest Foundation. And I'm just excited for them, because I think they've got some room to work with. Like half of our job is just letting American public know about BLM. We call them the hardest working lands. Like you can do so much, and they work so hard for the American people, that this was just awesome timing, I think, for people to understand. And hopefully everyone wants to learn more about BLM, because that's what they cared so much about, apparently, over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you say, that's the West, right? That's when you get out and drive. That's what captures your heart, your imagination, your sense of freedom. That's great. But I also think it's funny because, I've heard it. I remember the joke was Brown Lands Management or something, right?
Yeah, no, they used to be the Bureau of Lands and Minerals.
Right.
BLM.
Yes.
So, I mean, it used to be like literally just oil and gas kind of mining and grazing, and they still do that, right? Which is kind of amazing. And they still do all these other things. I mean, BLM is really the ultimate multi-use, multi-purpose, and it's a hard job. And so, and of course, and maybe we'll get into this, like, of course there are BLM lands we probably should dispose of. And every secretary since I've been in these roles has disposed of BLM lands appropriately through the process that exists. And that's okay. And oftentimes they use that money to purchase more BLM land that's better suited for access and recreation, or in holdings or things like that. So like BLM land is not all perfect and wonderful and used, but the process of just kind of saying we have to sell off 2 to 3 million acres is not one that the American public could sit with. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean that that gets down to it really is this was a horrible idea, a horrible proposal. It didn't even make sense in the way it would be executed, right? And trying to sell these lands or develop these lands at all was a little nutty, I would say, right?
That's kind of where, and I think it's been interesting, like my LinkedIn stories, we're not public facing, right? We're B2B. We're not going to do the memes and the social media, but on my LinkedIn, I have my own thoughts and I'm centered on them. Like it's not black or white, truly. And I think I'm getting a ton of like thank you notes and like messages and just a ton of interaction because like, wow, this is kind of a good, like the voice I need to hear, which is, yeah, actually, some of Mike Lee's proposal probably makes sense. Some of it's already in law, right? The flip-flop process of land exchange, lease, sell-off. There was other things that would set a new precedent that would totally, not be appropriate for outdoor recreation. I think a lot of other things actually on BLM lands. So there's definitely some reason behind it. Like his constituents want less BLM land for a reason, not because they hate the government, they hate the BLM. Oftentimes, that's a partner, right, in Western communities. It's because it's not working for them. They can't develop their football field for their, high school team. They can't get housing. They can't get a well for, well water. Like there's real issues we need to solve. And so I would never like downplay those things. And I think that the rhetoric, especially in social media, completely cuts out the rural and local voice. And I don't think that's actually helpful. So I've been trying to bring us back to like, no, there's a reason behind this. Like, especially on the House side, the bills, which were a little more nuanced and much smaller acreage, at least in the Utah one, like there's something there. And if you're not paying attention to it, like you've kind of missed the line here, the storyline. Like there is a housing issue in Western communities, especially those that abut BLM lands, because BLM lands are often, at the interface of a community. They're a little more front country. And there are rules and laws and decades of institution in place for a reason, so that you can't just do what, the senator was proposing. I think some of the biggest issues for us were not having a recreation safeguard, right? Where do we get to say that, like, yes, maybe 20 years ago that land was appropriate for disposal, but now it's a boondocking place. Now there's just hundreds of people camping there all the time. And again, we should have that conversation. It should be definitely with the local community. And I think the biggest part was the funding going to Treasury is such an issue for our organization because we fight so hard for every dollar for recreation and conservation. In fact, we give a lot, obviously, through excise tax and Sportfish Restoration Fund. I mean, we are the ultimate payers in a lot of cases. And then to say, we're cutting the budget, we're cutting funding, and any proceeds from the sale of land are actually going to be diverted to the Treasury, because right now a lot of that goes back to recreation. So if you're taking a trail away from a community, A, there's a safeguard in place now to have that conversation, like, whoa, there's a trail here. And B, there's a mechanism to say, okay, we have to take this trail because this is the land, like we need it for something, maybe a higher value in the community. And we're going to actually build another trail of better, quality for you nearby with the land we're going to get from that sale. None of that was in this proposal. And so it set a new standard where anyone needs money for anything, which, gosh, we need money for things every day in America. Oh, there's some land over here to sell. And that is that was scary.
Maybe do you think you could go through kind of the anatomy of what this bill was going to do, or I guess it was a provision, not a bill, excuse me,
Yep.
what the provision was going to do and kind of how it was finally thwarted after several attempts, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot, right? It's been months, It's been years, right? But I think starting just from this Congress and the reconciliation process, just to back up, reconciliation is the only way any of this could get done, because you only need 51 votes, right? 50 with the VP, but technically you only need 50 members of Congress. So if this was not reconciliation, none of these would have been brought up because everyone knows you don't have 60 votes in the Senate to do something. So it was the process of reconciliation, which only comes around really when you have House, Senate, and administration that are all the same party. That's the only time you can do something like this. So maybe this comes around every 8 years. So like, what has been building up the pressure on these issues, is at a head right now for a lot of reasons. And they had a mechanism to do it, of which they won't have again in a very long time. And they haven't had in a long time. So that's the reason for it. And I think the House process was a really interesting one because it was much more organic. It wasn't as, strategic. It was a last minute, add on to the House natural resources provision. It wasn't something the chairman, crafted. And they got pummeled, right? And Congresswoman Malloy, who was part of that, the Utah sell-off, called me and was like, can we talk? I want to explain myself. We had a meeting with her. Again, a lot of it, what made a lot of sense, the disposal and why. And she listened to us. It was a great conversation. I hope we can continue to work with someone like her. And it was Congressman Zinke and a couple of Republicans who said, this is not in line with my values or my constituents. And I'm not going to surprise leadership. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to vote no. And it did take a little longer than I thought, actually, because we had a good group. We had about 5 or 6 Republicans. And honestly, the night before the text was released and they were going to vote, it was Congressman Zinke and Whitney from my team working there and just talking to the leader, to Johnson, us sending in the rec areas that would be impacted, having a real back and forth on it, and getting enough members to say they couldn't vote on it, and getting also the members that introduced the bill to say, okay, we're not going to vote against it if our bill's not in there. So it was all behind the scenes, very little people paying attention. And then when they said it was going to come back in the Senate, I was like, there's no way, because the House can't pass it. And sure enough, I mean, a chairman can do that sort of thing. And I think when you see what we did in the House, we were able to replicate that in the Senate. It really took the Montana senators to say no way. And then our Idaho guides and outfitters, like just amazing recreation businesses getting together with the Idaho senators and them saying no way. And obviously the public pushback, I think, played in. It was a lot more behind the scenes, I think, than people realize. There were real procedural issues, and those hurdles, I think, moved the timeline in such a way that it became very hard for leadership to see how they could get a bill in that would be jurisdictional, not have issues. So part of Senator Lee's statement is it's right. It was procedural. Part of it was, I think, there was enough pushback and there was enough members to go in and say we could vote this down on the floor in an amendment, and that was the threat. And so I think they came around that, like, let's take this out and maybe work on some other things with the senator. And I can't stress enough too, like, I think Senator Lee was talking about the White House being behind it, and it was Trump, I'm doing this for Trump. And a lot of, we were able to talk to Secretary Burgum last week. We got a secretarial order. It was awesome. It was kind of amidst all this stuff, so it probably got lost. It was the first recreation secretarial order of this administration. It's awesome. And we were able to talk about the housing issue. And a day later, he, and the Senator Lee bill, a day later, he went on and interviewed and said, we don't really care about that provision that much. Like, we just want the bill. I don't really know about that provision. And that was a flag, right, to the Republicans. Like, this is not necessarily coming from the White House. We have a housing issue. We're dealing with it. He has an MOU. So I think it separated the White House a little bit from what Senator Lee was doing. And I think that helped Republicans. But at the end of the day, like, this will come back in other forms. This was just the easiest path to passage in a scary sense, because it was only 50 votes you needed. And obviously there's that many Republicans. So getting the 4 on the record early on and making them feel good about that. And then, behind the scenes, I mean, we were still talking to Senator Lee's staff the whole time and airing our concerns and having an open dialogue. And, I hope that pays forward to, continuing to show that there's pragmatic voices in the room that understand housing needs, because who's creating a housing issue more than some of our recreation communities, right? And so we can't not be part of that conversation. We're in the conversation. We're there. But we're also really clear, and we have been since, my board put out something in January of our guardrails, and those haven't changed. And that's been really nice to be able to say, this isn't about Senator Lee. This isn't about a specific proposal. This is something we decided pre all of this that we have to see in order to get on board with disposal. and we haven't seen it.
I mean, I think it brings up a lot. I mean, one of the first things it brings up for me is in an era that's so polarized, I think it's, people can give you a hard time when you have to create open dialogue with the other side, right? As Drew Simmons, who I had a guest on here once, he's quoted the old, like, if you're not at the table, you're lunch, right? So it's really
Or if you're not
important.
at the table, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. That's what I
There you
always,
go.
Secretary Salazar taught me that when I worked for him. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but right now things are so polarized. I think you can take a lot of heat for, trying to be open to all sides, but it's so essential to really coming to solutions, right? Like when you talk about that, there is actually a housing crisis. And if we're not all working together, we're not going to have any solutions.
Yeah. Congresswoman Malloy said something, and I just like can't stop thinking about it. And I want to be on the solutions end of it. But the reconciliation process, that bill coming out of nowhere in the House, like we did not foresee that really. Got a couple warning signals from members of Congress, from Republican members, probably like the night before, right? And I just didn't believe it because it wasn't in the original text. So it's like, oh, we're good. There's such a bubbling up of issues in rural communities. A lot of them had to do with development and housing and public lands, that this reconciliation process was like busting open the door. This is the only way we're going to do it. This is where we're going to do it. It was bigger and broader than it probably should have, And I was like, okay, what do we need to do then? Because we don't want the door to keep busting open, right? Because fighting those fights is expensive. It's hard. It's all of the, air in the room, right? ORR doesn't make money off of, we have membership dues. So like, we're just following our members. We don't fundraise for this, and then we have our team working on it day in and day night when we have other things to do, right? So it's like, how do we stop this? And she said, will help us break open some windows. And like, I can't stop thinking about that analogy, because it's like, there's windows we could break open, right, on this issue. We could find some improvements of current policy and current law that help do some of the things that we all would agree make sense, right? Or most of us, and we're not, most of us in the policy world that care about these things and follow these things, that we would agree. And the public probably wouldn't notice, just like they haven't noticed the many, many times, including Secretary Haaland and Tracy Stone Manning, have sold land, right? BLM land. You do not know, because the process is it's difficult. It's onerous, as it should be. To sell an acre of federal land is very difficult. And I think we need to keep a lot of that, but I also think we need to open some windows so that we're not always busting down the door with these huge proposals of 2 to 3 million acres. If really what you need is a couple acres for well water in a community, let's talk about those couple acres of well water. And this is a difficult opinion, I think, for some people to hear, but like, I think the conservation environmental community has made it very hard to do any of that without acres of wilderness or acres of protected land, because that's usually the tit for tat for selling land. And the Republicans are not into any acres of protected land until they can sell some land. So we're just at this stymie. We're just at this like stronghold on both sides, where you can't get conservation or protection if we don't get sell off. Well, you can't get sell off if we don't have conservation protection. It's like, now we're not doing either. And we probably need a little bit of, I would love to have a lot of conservation and protection, but like, we probably do need a little bit of the disposal. Does the DOI process work? It sure does. Does it take years and years and years? And is it outdated in a lot of ways? It sure is. So like, right. What's that? And I mean, I think that's where we'll probably center going forward. But it's not as clear cut as like the social media things I've seen, which, it's hard for me behind the scenes to like, I guarantee 99.9% of the public who weighed in didn't read the bill. Right. I feel
I didn't read it. Yeah.
Right. And I feel I have a little, a tiny, I understand Senator Lee's staff being so upset and saying that's not what the bill says. Because I'm like, you're right. It's not what the bill says, but like, it's great. It's great communications. But what the bill said still was not, pulp. I mean, we read the bill 1,000 times and there was no way for us to support it. And obviously we worked to ensure it didn't pass, but like, it kind of stinks that we weren't all talking about the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the problem is there's a lack of confidence that Senator Lee and other people doing this are actually out there trying to get public land for wells and affordable housing, that that these huge tracts of land were going to go back, that ski resorts on public land were going to take over that public land and be able to operate however they wanted, that, they were going to
Right.
build these ridiculous, the freedom cities. They were going to build, a proposal for a 350,000 person city north of Grand Junction in Fruita, where, tech companies could have nuclear power reactors to run AI and have no federal jurisdiction. Like, this is the kind of stuff that, I think is scaring
Right. It
people
doesn't
off.
solicit confidence. I totally agree. 100% on all the things. And I'm not saying that everyone is a good actor, but I do think, as we've done really deep rural development work in communities, like recreation economies need to focus on housing. And
Sure.
and we got to figure that out, right? So if we say recreation is the solution, and your communities are veering away from extraction and either supplanting or supplementing with recreation economies, well, we're no better than any other industry if we're going to move out thousands of people who've lived there forever, if they're going to be priced out, if we're going to have workers traveling 2 hours to get to wherever they work. So I want to be better, right? And I think that's the interest in continuing to have these conversations. And also, we just set a pretty big line in the sand that the proposals we've seen are a no-go, a hard no-go. And that we have to be a lot smarter and more specific and thoughtful going forward.
Yeah, because I think the people who do live in rural communities want their public land where they hunt, where they've been with their families for years and years, and the people moving in, obviously want that land too, right? So that's
the economic benefit, right? Yeah, that's what drives them. So we're fully on save our public land, do not sell it, and we're fully on. But there's a housing issue to work on.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe something that might have surprised some of these more conservative lawmakers, right? That, I think there's been a huge shift, especially post-COVID, right? And we all experience it, right? When you try to go camping, you need a reservation that you haven't made 6 months in advance. Zion National Park, I was there last summer and, did the Narrows, which I'd done 30 years before pretty much on my own. And there was just a pilgrimage of hundreds of people doing it, right? 5 million people went to Zion, I think, last year or something like that. All these, and that puts pressure, as you said, on BLM lands. It's like, well, we can't, we have to find new places to be able to just recreate sort of casually, right? There's so much pressure and there's so much love for these public lands. And that's changed so much recently that I think that might be a surprise to some of these lawmakers who are more used to being able to do whatever they wanted to do out there, right?
Yeah, and I think too, like what you just mentioned, like the aspirational piece, this came up from one of my members in the motorized side, but I was like, why are you guys against it? I'm just trying to understand, because a lot of, our recreation assets were at risk, right? When you look at some of the maps, the maps that we were looking at. And but at this one group, I thought, man, I don't really see a ton of your specific places at risk. Like and they were like, we're growing and we want to grow. And we're aspirational. We think that land might not have a place right now for our recreation activity, but it could in 5 years, it could in 10. I mean, that's the beauty of BLM land. A lot of it isn't designed in a way that it's just one use or it's just for something. I mean, some of these places could be the next awesome campsite, the next epic mountain bike, trail, the next, amazing water, community opportunity for fishing and boating. So that was a cool way to think about it too, is like the public lands are all of ours, not just one person from one state to make a decision on their own state. And gosh, if we knew 50 years ago what we know now about recreation, we would have been protecting a lot more land for recreation. We would have been doing a lot more. So now that we have that vision and we know what recreation does to people and economies and quality of life, let's not let any of that get taken away, because really we're going to need all of this if we're trending. If these trend lines continue, we're going to need these places.
Yeah. And then at the same time, all that pressure, I think, as you're getting to on the other side, makes these communities that have been there for a long time, people who've worked hard, maybe in extractive industries, maybe somewhere else, it's squeezing people out of their traditional communities.
Yep. Well, they see it as tourism. And I think what our rural development work has done is, yes, of course, recreation has traditionally been that tourist economy. But in so many towns now, you've mentioned Bentonville, Salida, Fruita, Farmington, New Mexico, Harper's Ferry, like New River Gorge area. Now this is where people are living and working. It's a recruitment and retention strategy, and that is what we need to do more, and that's longer and more complicated work. But like if you're out in Livingston, Montana, right, there's tech companies and healthcare companies like you've never seen, some of the biggest in the country, and it's because their CEOs and founders wanted to live near Bozeman in Montana, and then they brought their hundreds of workers with them and all that economic value. That's not a tourist economy. That's not where you're going when you're doing like the Mighty Five or your big park, trips with your parents. That is a recreation economy that is there because businesses are there and people. It's the number one recruitment for young people to Utah to live and work in Utah.
Yeah.
It's not family values. That's number two. Recreation is number one. And so you're seeing this real, I think, redesign. I think it's happening organically, and we're trying very hard to make it happen. We're giving grants. We're working with rural development. We're passing new laws and Farm Bill to help the infrastructure of it. But really, like, there's authentic recreation economies coming to be, and they're based on where people want to live, work, and play. And I think that will help. That will help I think mend that divide that you just spoke about that's real in so many communities, is that there's this recreation economy coming into this traditional, maybe extractive community, taking all the housing, taking all the, opportunities, transforming it into something that's maybe more seasonal, that isn't welcomed, right? And I've seen that dissipate, especially because of COVID, because now a lot of people can work wherever they want, live wherever they want. The workforce has dispersed, and so there's a realignment that I don't even think the members of Congress have totally caught up with yet. That's happening that we should all capture.
Yeah, and I mean, and that seems what we said before. Like, it seems like there's actually a place where both sides could maybe get together and if they worked for solutions instead of just political screaming, they could find ways to build better communities in these, around public lands.
We have this program. It was actually designed by an Obama political who a lot of people know, was carried out and implemented. It was the end of the Obama administration. So they kind of waited and implemented it with the politicals under the first Trump administration. Biden carried it over. Now Trump too is carrying it over. And it's called the Rural Recreation Economies and Rural Communities Program. It's an amazing partnership between EPA, USDA, Forest Service, and Appalachia, and all the rural commissions. And they ask communities who want to make an effective transition to a recreation economy, like who's thinking about recreation. There have to be sort of a underserved rural community with not a lot of infrastructure money. And out of like 300 applicants, they only had funding for like 10, right? So 300 communities have raised their hand, pretty much every cohort, and said, we want to be a recreation economy. But the 10 that get funded, all of these agency and consultants go in for weeks and into the community and help them design a real authentic plan. Who do you want to be? What do you want to look like? So that, because they don't want to be a Moab, they don't want to be they don't want to be a Boulder. And what do you want to be? What do you want to look like? What does it take? And then ORR has been able to come in and fund some of those implementation plans and with grants. And it's just this beautiful thing that's happening around the country. We're now in our third cohort, through every administration, and it's real work. And it's so amazing to see, do the top line work that we've been doing, obviously, the past couple of weeks with the sell-off, but then the real community work that puts it all into action, that these policies really do impact these communities, and these communities need the support. And like more things like that, if we could go and fund every community that's asking to be a recreation economy, I think there'd be so much less of this, because they'd be developing thoughtfully with the widespread support of, hopefully many members of the community that have different backgrounds. And then, our implementation grants have allowed them to unlock, millions in federal and state and, other funding, because they see that the private sector is involved. We just did some in rural North Carolina, Tennessee, the communities that got hit by the hurricane, to help grow back their recreation economies, because they told Secretary Rollins when she was down there asking, the Asheville area, what do you need? And they were like, we need to get like people on our rivers, people on our trails, like that is what we need. And so we've been able to fund some of this. So that's, that's the like hopeful, amazing side of some of the political stuff that's happening is like, these are real people in real places we're talking about. And if you haven't been there and talked to them, you probably shouldn't be weighing in on either crafting legislation that could really hurt them, like maybe the Senator Lee bill, or, going against legislation that, maybe is more pragmatic down the road. And I'm hopeful that we can get there.
Now, here's one thing that we use a lot, right, in the outdoor recreation community, especially, is we talk about the $1.2 trillion outdoor recreation community number. How confident are you in that number? How, what is it? Where does it come from? Is it real?
I'm not confident at all. I think it totally undermines and undervalues us. So BEA does a beautiful job. We are in lockstep with Department of Commerce on this. ORR sort of fields this work and gets it funded every year. It is under threat. So like if there's a to-do out of this, everyone needs to go to their appropriators and say, we need to fund the Bureau of Economic Analysis that does these accounts. I've heard that they're going to get rid of BEA accounts. This is so valuable. This has put us on the map as an industry. It literally is the reason why we can stand up with this voice that we've had over the past couple of weeks and be heard legitimately. Because when I was at OIA, I don't know, a decade ago, as like their first full-time lobbyist for the industry for outdoor rec, I would use our OIA numbers, which were awesome, like really probably the gold standard at that point. And I'll never forget a Republican senator saying, yeah, but those are industry numbers. Those aren't real. And I said, well, then why don't you count them? And then we crafted a bill together and we got it passed. And it's that now the federal government counts us as a unique sector of the economy. So whenever you're going somewhere and you say, oh, it's the recreation economy, and someone's looking at you like, that's just a nice to have, you're like, no, this is an actual need to have that's counted by the federal government. It is so important. This is our next battle. This is truly, it scares me a lot that we could go without these numbers that we've relied on for 6 years. But what's fascinating about these numbers and where I think we're undercounting is they don't count what private industry counts when we do our own accounting. They don't count the anything that's happening overseas, right? Because it's the American GDP. And so, for instance, in the OIA report, we would count the entirety of a bike, right? That should all be included, because even though the bike is being assembled abroad, like all of those parts, everything that goes into the bike is what contributes to you riding a bike here. Plus, it's usually an American company, right? So like it's an American company. It's maybe assembled overseas, come back. BEA is only accounting for the difference between the price that it was taken to assemble and then the cost that the retailer sells it at, because that's all that stays in America. That's the only. So honestly, they could be, for a $2,000 bike, they can only be looking at $300 or $400. Whereas if you're a private industry accounting for your value, of course, you're looking at the $2,000 bike. It's a $2,000 bike. So we are undercounted in that very kind of specific area that you may cut out because it's like getting very wonky. But B, of course, we're not evaluating the bigger picture of, real estate value, clean air, clean water, quality of life. And I don't think we should. I think we want these numbers to remain like legitimate and for them to be direct output. But at some point you got to say, hey, I live here and my house is more expensive and I'm contributing more taxes because I have access to a park or trails or water, or my healthcare costs are down because I get out and hike every day and I'm around trees. So no, 1.2 trillion is a low ball number, I think, for all of those reasons. I also think it's the best we're going to get, and I'm pretty happy with it. So we got to keep making sure we get those numbers. And you know what? I don't know that we'll be 1.2 trillion, in the next couple of years. We've had some headwinds, and trade is a huge one. And so it'd be really nice to have government data tracking what's happening in our industry, because I think it's really changed over the past 6 to 7 months.
In what way?
I think with coming back from the COVID slump, we had more headwinds. So we didn't have the turnaround that I think we all thought we'd have. Obviously, everyone buying their products at the same time, not needing them. And then the trade. I mean, we've seen businesses, I don't think there's enough reporting on it, that are close to shuttering their doors, have shuttered their doors. We're laying off people. We're not hiring. We're not investing in the innovation we have. Even the conservation we've invested in traditionally. There's very little margin for error. And that's across the entire recreation economy. That's every sector. So having government data track that, now and into the future is just important. It's really important.
And you say that office is in danger of being cut.
Yeah, that counts are all of the Bureau of Economic Analysis satellite accounts, which is where we live, is in danger of not moving forward. So I don't know the action is on that. We're obviously meeting with a lot of members. There was probably a broader action. Again, we don't really speak to like the public. So, but whoever does and is paying attention, I think there's going to be a real need for us to speak up on this issue. And it might, come down to a call with the agencies.
That's great to know, because I've heard nothing of that before, and I'm sure most people listening.
It's kind of new from last week. A lot of stuff got lost last week when we were fighting this Senator Lee bill.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the other wins that I think you've been a big part of and experienced. The Great American Outdoors Act, which was actually passed during the first Trump administration. The Explore Act, passed during the Biden administration. These were really big, important acts. How did we find agreement here on both sides of the political aisle? And also, how will these acts continue to help protect and encourage outdoor recreation?
So, I think ORR coming together has had a lot of impact on these. So when we're going in and we're saying all of these user communities or, all of these activity groups in recreation agree on this, and you won't get one that's going to push back, it creates a very nice padding for a member of Congress to support. Infrastructure and access are why we were formed. Everyone in our entire recreation economy agrees we should have good infrastructure and good access. And so GAOA was the infrastructure access bill. It was really cool. It used to be just parks. And we brought in Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, and Forest Service. And with that came a ton of other members of Congress, right, that didn't have parks in their district, but they had fish and wildlife refuges or they had national forests. So I think that, the big 10 is always the better 10. And so we've been able to do that with all of these things. It helps that some of these didn't come from taxpayer dollars, right? We're not always creating new taxes or new opportunity that the Great Outdoors Act had to offset. Explore didn't have to come with funding. I think it's also building those relationships. We've expanded our champions. We had a secret whip count on what the vote would look like if we did have to run an amendment against the Lee bill, and you would be shocked. Like, I was floored at the support we would have had for that. So, and that comes from building members into, Champions for Great American Outdoors Act. Okay, well, now do Explore. Okay, and now do, now you can, hear us on our lands issues. I love that we always say thank you. After Explore, members of Congress called me and said, I've never been thanked for a bill in my entire life. Usually groups are like, okay, we did that. Now here's the next fight. Here's the next fight. Like, the recreation community is pretty amazing. Like, we're pretty grateful when we get something done. And it's usually a place that people can celebrate for a long time. They're still celebrating Great American Outdoors Act. Every member who voted yes to that can still go to their community and say, here are the projects, here's the money, here's what's happened. And that's going to help us in our next round, because we're trying to get it reauthorized next year for the 250th. That's going to really help us, because we can go back and say, hey, thank you. You did this. It was awesome. Do it again. It's been amazing wins, even though it might not feel like that on a daily basis. With the headwinds I've mentioned, it's been amazing wins. And I do think this win last week is like another building block, right? For more to come. We just have to harness it in the right way.
What would be your kind of dream scenario for the next step then, building on Great American Outdoors Act, building on Explore Act, building on this recent win and stopping this public land sell-off?
Oh gosh, I haven't had time to think of this. It's a great question. I think it's these, maybe it feels like smaller things, but it's like getting the right funding, getting the right, infrastructure, getting the right smaller things for rural communities and workforce. Maybe some of the like things that feel harder and like they are more complicated, but we've got this great support now. And of course it's not, the win that we got this week was actually just status quo, right? So I think we need to get back to actually winning. Let's call it a win. I think everyone should take credit for it. That's great. But we just protected what we already have today that we shouldn't have even had to protect, right? So when can we start stepping forward again? And I think that's what the past, I think for a lot of us, the past couple of years even have felt like we're fighting cuts. We're fighting, and this is even before the Trump administration, fighting cuts on federal lands, fighting climate change impacts, fighting all these things, the threat of tariffs. I would love to get to a point where we're actually making new gains, like new things. Explore was new, and that secretary order we got last week was new. So those feel new and forward thinking, but just fending off things that, shouldn't be happening anyway, that are already, current law. What a waste of energy, right? So we got to get out of that space. We got to get out of the defense space. We got to get into the proactive, offense.
And what do you think for people listening, what is the best way for them to be involved in a lot of this very complicated, political maneuvering?
I think paying attention and really paying attention. Check your sources, make sure you're getting the right information, be involved locally. And then I think there's just these bigger plays, right? Like the connecting recreation that maybe not everyone feels as connected to as we do, and probably the people that listen to this. But the next frontier is health, right? I mean, we're just health, AI. I mean, there's all these huge national issues coming at us. And I think recreation is a major player in all of those. And we're just not connecting that dot. We're not great at aligning with the cool national or the big national conversation, right? We're in our bubble on public lands. Well, how does public lands and what we just did connect to our health crisis? Well, I mean, it's huge, right? Nature and getting outside and being able to have those experiences is a health benefit, and it should be seen that way. And we actually had legislation in reconciliation. It got stripped. That would have connected your HSA, FSA dollars to everything you could do outside and all of your outdoor products. So let's move that now. Let's move that. Yeah. I mean, let's buy our ski equipment, our hiking equipment, our helmets. Let's buy them with our HSA, FSA account, because it's a medical expense. It's a preventative medical expense, and not just on the physical side, but on the mental side. This is where we need to be heading and thinking and working and talking. And I think the more people that connect lands to these other bigger conversations, you're worried about health, and you're worried about medical costs, and you're worried about the mental health crisis, and you're worried about, kids and digital access. What about nature? So there's definitely something there. And we're doing a huge health forum next year on that. We're also doing a tech and innovation forum in a couple months that's bringing in the best and the brightest in our outdoor tech companies to help agencies think a little bit differently. To what you said, 5 million people in Zion and the Narrows crowded, that doesn't have to be the way forward. And it doesn't necessarily have to be permits and reservations that fixes that. It's better data and real-time data and visitors making the decision on the experience they want to have. I would see a bunch of red blobs in the Narrows, right, as in a heat map, and say, hell no, I'm going somewhere else, right? Yes. But someone might say, that's the experience I want. I don't want to be alone. I don't know what I'm doing. This is my first time. And they will have a great experience if they know that. If they know the line is 2 hours long and the kid's iPad is charged and their snacks, cool. But I want to know, where am I going to have the type of experience I want to have? And if it's not there, where else? Send me somewhere else. Show me the adjacent BLM lands. Show me the adjacent state park lands. Show me the adjacent county lands. And then tell me what I can do when I'm there. And this is all 2025, easy peasy, right? But it's not happening. And instead, we have antiquated systems that don't talk to each other, that are making decisions that affect a ton of people and a ton of businesses and a ton of communities. And I think data solves a ton of this. So we're really excited about that conversation in a couple months.
Well, unfortunately, we're starting to wind down. So one thing I'd like you to let everyone know is how they can get in touch with you, how can they learn more about the work that ORR does, and how they can get involved in some way if they want to.
Yeah, outdoorrecreationroundtable.org. We have a ton of great resources. We have an awesome team. We focus a lot of our day in just making sure the recreation economy is successful and it grows and more people can access it. Get outside no matter what your activity. So anything you do outside is something we support. We work more with businesses. So helping your businesses, buying your products, going to your local retailer of any sort is an awesome way. We'd love to hear feedback, though, from communities especially. We work a lot with agencies, agency folks on the ground, and I know they're really interested. And I would say follow some of the resources we put out. We have an amazing rural economic development toolkit. We have a workforce resource for people having, an outdoor recreation related careers. We're obviously doing this tech and innovation side, which I think is going to be of interest to a lot of people. We've got the new healthcare webinar series rolling out with some really interesting healthcare topics as it relates to outdoor rec. So some of those are available to the public, but I'd say in general, get outside. Every time you get outside, you are driving a local community. I mean, you're helping, these are real jobs. These are real communities, and it's so fun to see this industry come together the way it has. And I just hope there's more of that, of like centering on the land, not what divides us, but like what brings us together. And clearly America's lands and waters bring us together. I think we're going to hear some interesting announcements this week from the president, like at the national level on these things. We obviously had the one from the secretary last week on our Explorer secretary order. So we are breaking in the national dialogue. And I think that's a really good thing. More to come. We're an A-list industry, I like to say now. We were like an A- B+ when I got into it. Now I feel like we're like an A industry. People know who we are.
Well, thanks to people like you. I think you've done so much incredible work. And finally, and I'm extremely curious to hear your answer on this, I'll give you the last question we give everyone on this podcast, and that is simply, what gives you hope?
My team gives me hope of amazing professionals who work tirelessly on these issues, tirelessly and thanklessly, right? We're not a big publicly facing. So that is amazing to see people just behind the scenes grinding like really complicated issues. Our members or trade associations are just the coolest things in the world that very few people interact with. I think they do a lot of the work for keeping all of us on the map here. And I would say the past week, like the responses to some of the dialogue, the thoughtfulness, people wanting to know more. They want to know the nitty gritty. And then my kids, when they are not outside, like, we are a different family. So when they are outside, we sleep, we are happy, we are like awesome, we eat well. And I just, I see it every day. I'm like, God, if like everyone's got to get outside every day. So my kids give me hope that, that we got to look at the kids, what drives them. It's like, God, if they're in nature, we have like zero issues, sibling fights, everything's gravy. The second we get inside, all hell breaks loose. So let's keep watching those kids and learning from them.
Love that. Everyone's got to get outside every day. I think that should be on your desk.
Yeah. As I sit inside all day.
Well, no, you're going to get outside today. I think you're going to get outside today after saying that.
I got my run in this morning. I'm good.
There you go. There you are. Well, I can't thank you enough for being on and getting into some of these deep issues and really how everything works. And I'm excited for the next time we have you on Open Container and talk again.
Thanks for being so thoughtful and for what you do. A lot of fun people on here, so happy to be part of it.
Thanks for imbibing Open Container, a production of Rockfight LLC. Please take a second to follow our show on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on, and send your emails and feedback to myrockfight@gmail.com. Learn more about Outdoor Recreation Roundtable at recreationroundtable.org. Our producers today were David Carsat and Colin True. Art direction provided by Sarah Gensert. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. Get some. Thanks for listening.